Hi there everybody, it's Kendra here. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a very simple project bag. This is kind of like a tutorial more than anything. I don't give specific measurements, it's just a guideline and a really simple method to take any fabric and turn it into a project bag. So to make the very simple bag, I'm going to need an outer fabric, and I've been having this in my collection for a long time and I'm ready to use it. I also need a lining fabric, and I have this right here that I had dyed at one point, and I think it'll be right about the right size, and it seems to match pretty well. And lastly, since this is a zippered bag, I do need the zipper. So I'm just going to use these supplies. I'm not going to be really careful about measuring. I'm just going to base the size of my bag off the size of my zipper and the size of my fabric pieces. So I know I want my bag just probably about an inch on each side longer than my zipper. So I know I want my bag to be about an inch wider on each side than my zipper. So I'm going to make a little zipper tab, and that'll be my top, and then I'll need a front, a back, and the same size for the lining. So I've trimmed up my pieces here, and you can see I've got my zipper. I have just a square rectangle of fabric to go on each side. It is larger than I need, but I do find it works better to have the excess and then trim it to size when we're ready. And I have a front piece, a back piece, and then a front lining and a back lining. And they are just, again, large rectangles. You can totally modify this to be any size you want. I'm going for a large bag because I do want it to be able to kind of sit by my chair, have some sweater supplies, keep my knitting things, and just kind of be held there rather than come with me all the time. So that is my plan for this one. I am going to start by sewing on these zipper pulls, and I will do that by seeing where my edging here is, and then just doing right sides together and sewing as close to the little metal piece without breaking my needle as I can. Just going back and forth so that when I pull it back this way, it will lay flat, and I'll probably give it a little top stitch there. And doing the exact same thing on this side. It'll likely work best if I can move my zipper pull back a little bit. I just want to make sure to keep these lined up. So I'm going to stick a pin in here, fold this right sides together again, just sew right across, pull it back, and top stitch. So now I'm going to line up my back side to start with my zipper. So I've got right side up on my back piece, and I'm going to take my zipper and place it right side down so that when we are finished with this step, this will be a finished seam and the top of the zipper will be right next to the back piece. So I'm going to lay that down. I'm going to do my best to center it in my piece, and then I'm going to take the lining piece and also line it up with that same edge. And I want to make sure that the back of the zipper has the right side of my lining facing it. I know it's hard to tell on this lining, but that's the way I am going to sandwich it, and I'm going to put pins all the way along so that it's lined up. So I'm sewing, and I came to where the zipper pull is. So one little trick when doing this is to put your needle down. So right now it is fully down and it is kind of locked in there, which means when I lift up the foot, it's still not going anywhere. Then I can kind of peek in between my layers and do my best to move that zipper to a spot I have already sewn. And really by doing that, it means that I don't get a little bump where I'm trying to get past the zipper pull. So I'm just gonna, I need to use both my hands here, but I'm gonna slide it back over here, and then I'll be able to finish sewing the length of the zipper. So now I've opened it up and you can see my zipper is encased here. I've got the right side and the right side facing on the other part here. You can tell I need a little bit of ironing, and I am going to iron this seam before top stitching, but first I am going to do this seam right here so that I can iron them and top stitch them at the same time. Got my other panel laying right side up. I'm going to now put the piece with the zipper attached with the zipper's right side facing the right side of the other piece. So I'm going to line that all up, and then I'm going to take my lining once again and stack it on top and sew the seam exactly the same as I did on this side. So here's my piece all ready for ironing. You can see the zipper is nicely nestled in the middle, lots of room to open and close, and if we flip it over, we have the same on this side with the lining. I'm a little messy here where I was seaming it. However, once your bag's closed up and sewn together, you will not be able to see it. So I'm just going to give it a quick pressing, and then we will be ready to top stitch. And when I top stitch, I like to go all the way from one end right through to this side, and the same over here. And it really helps to kind of keep that fabric out of the zipper to make sure you don't have any issues opening and closing it. Now that my top stitching is done, we have some options on our next step. We can go ahead, and a very simple way to finish this off would be to move it so that it's right sides together and just do a seam all the way around. That will put the seam on the inside and is just one way to finish things off. Now another option would be to put in a side piece if you want it to be wider. You can tell that this zipper and space, I don't know, it would be maybe like ½ an inch, and you can put in a side or a bottom to make a roomier bag. We can also add a handle, which I think I am going to do because I have some little scraps that would work perfectly for that. And then a final option for finishing would be to go ahead and open it up like I have here, put the right outer sides together, the right inner sides, lining sides together, and by doing this you'll be able to sew a giant box all the way around. You're going to need to leave room to turn it. And this way all of your seams will be enclosed, so you won't see the seams on the lining. So I am going to do it this way, but first I'm going to take a second and make a little handle. I have a little pile of scraps here, so I'm going to see what's going to work. I really think something like this one side piece I had pulled off will be basically perfect, about the right size and everything. So to make this a nice finished handle, I'm going to go and sandwich it lengthwise, long ways together. I'm going to sew a long skinny tube, so right along the cut edge here, and then I will turn it right way out. I'll press it, top stitch, and be ready to attach it to my bag. So I've sewn up my handle here, and now you can kind of make some decisions. Like, I was looking at this thinking I could do one large loop on one side, I could cut it in half and do 2 smaller loops. I don't see this as being a bag I'm gonna like stick my whole hand into and be carrying around by this little handle. Like I said, I want this to kind of be a bag that stays by my chair where I normally do my knitting. So I think because of that, I am going to go ahead, I'm gonna cut it in half and have 2 smaller loops, one on each end, just so that it's super easy to grab, pick up from either side, and yeah, just to have those handles on there. Now that I've given it a little snip, I've decided I'm going to just overlap them, and my plan is to sew them on first. I'm going to line them up with where my zipper pull was there, right sides facing again, and have that kind of encased in the seam there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on this other piece. So now that the handles are sewn on, you'll see I went over them quite a few times just because I do want to make sure if this is heavy full of things, it's not going to come flying out. So they are kind of folded in, which is how I want them. Now I'm going to do like I showed before, where I have the right sides for the outer facing and the right sides for the inside facing. I'm just going to pull it over like this, you can see. And one thing to note when you're doing this, now we do have a little bit of bulk on the sides here, and we have to decide how we want that to look. I want to make sure that my handles are accessible and that it's not really bunched. Now, if you try to sandwich this different ways, it will look different in your end result. Now, this may just change how you want to do it. For me, I want to make sure that this seam and this other front seam are matching, and I'm going to tuck it in so that where that handle meets will be somewhat enclosed, and it will create a bit of a triangle effect on that zipper pull, but for me it's worth it because it gives you that width still. You don't have to have it just as thin as the opening, but at the same time, I think it looks nice in the end. So that's going to be my plan. I'm going to start by pinning this seam at the front and pinning that same seam on this side. So I'm going to sew all the way around, starting probably around here to the corner, around to that corner, all the way big rectangle, and leaving a couple inches so that I will be able to turn it right side. One more thing, just make sure that your zipper is open when you are sewing, or most of the way open, because you'll need that when it comes time to turn it. So my seam goes all the way around aside from that opening on the lining, but my very last detail, and this is totally optional, is to give it kind of a boxy bottom. So to do that, we're going to open it up, and I want to do this while it is this way so that I can do the lining and the outer separate. But we're basically going to take the corner, we're going to fold it so that those seams are matched up front and back, and we're basically going to take a seam where my finger is, make a little triangle, and seam it across here, and it's going to make that boxy corner at the bottom. So I'm going to try to make them as even as possible and do one in each of the 4 corners that I see right now. Alright, so all 4 of my corners now have that box triangle seam. I'm going to use the scissors and trim it off. If you haven't done this before, it might make sense to turn it right way out just to make sure that everything looks the way that you want it to prior to that, because at this point you can rip it out, but once you cut it, you're kind of totally sunk. So I'm going to trim all 4 corners, and then I will find my opening right here and turn it all right sides together. Alright, right before I stuff the lining into the outer of the bag, you can see I've got my boxed corners, I've got my opening here. You can, if you want the very best finish, go ahead and hand stitch it closed, and that really will make it seamless. Honestly, this is the inside of the lining for a bag I'm using for myself for home use. I'm not that worried about it. I'm just going to use my machine and sew this up here and tuck it inside my outer fabric. Alright, so that's really all there is. This is quite a large bag. I think I have about 6 or 7 balls of yarn in here right now, and it's nice and roomy, and I think it's going to work perfectly for what I wanted it for. Hope this was helpful to you. If you have any suggestions or ideas, leave them down below. I know others and myself would love to read them. Thank you for watching. Bye!